Pranandal Balb, my name's John Welch and I'm the lead for Equity and Wellbeing at Central South Consortium. I have the pleasure today of introducing Dr. Coral Harper as our third speaker in the National Wellbeing Programme, looking specifically at helping leaders at this difficult time. Dr. Coral Harper has 24 years as a qualified teacher and then a senior lead in supporting children and young people within mainstream and those particularly with social, emotional, mental health difficulties and/or challenging behaviour. She's a former deputy head teacher for 10 years at a local authority special school in Bristol, specifying with children with social, emotional, mental health difficulties, and was acting head teacher for a year. She's also an independent freelance consultant supporting teachers and other educational professionals and groups with challenging and vulnerable children. She specialises in understanding and supporting behaviour for better learning. She's also former head of Mulberry Bush Organisation, a psychotherapeutic institution for very traumatised children. Coral has extensive experience in training, coaching, mentoring and supervision, and is the principal educator in trauma-informed practice. We are really looking forward to Coral's presentation today, and please ask any questions in the chat bar because there is some time for Coral to address these at the end of her presentation. I know we're really looking forward to it, and I shall hand over to Coral now. Diolch yn fawr.
Okay, good evening and welcome. I'm a Teams newbie, I have to say, although my world, like everybody else's, turned upside down in March and I've become quite accustomed to using different technologies. Training on Teams is a first for me, so please be gentle with me. Thank you for that introduction, John. I wasn't the head of the Mulberry Bush, I was the head of the foundation stage at the Mulberry Bush, but I have had, I guess, a scattered career working in psychotherapeutic environments, and it's a privilege and a delight to be working with trauma-informed schools as the Director of Strategy and Training in Wales. It's a real privilege when I met Dr. Margot Sunderland, who is the director of the Centre for Child Mental Health, really. I was privileged to have the opportunity to learn so much about the psychotherapeutic world. I don't profess to be a clinician at all. I'm a teacher at heart, I'm a practitioner at heart, but I now spend most of my time really talking about mental health, the neuroscience of trauma, and training, the training programme that we deliver in schools across Wales, across the UK actually, but my work predominantly in Wales. So I am delighted to be here with you and to talk about this really, really important subject of secondary trauma and what it means and what these other terms that we come across mean, like vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, burnout. And I'm wondering if maybe you're here because you perhaps may be feeling the symptoms of some of these or wondering about the symptoms of some of these, and certainly experiencing the impact of months of extreme stress and discombobulation over the last 10 months, and even kind of the uncertainty that sits with you today really of, well, what happens now if actually a bubble is burst and I have to self-isolate? Does that affect my whole Christmas period really and my ability to see my family or not? I can't really think of a more stressful time, certainly in my adult lifetime, for teachers and educators amongst us. So I'm hoping that tonight really I can be of some help in giving you some of the science behind what may be happening for you and what to do about it fundamentally, because we are pragmatists at heart as educators and we all want strategies. So let's begin with an overview. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the different terms, what they all mean, what's happening in terms of the body, mind and brain. And please remember that the body, mind and brain are intimately connected. So things that happen in our body are pretty good indications of what's happening in our brain and our mind too. Then we're going to talk about, so what's the problem with all of this? Maybe we are suffering from compassion fatigue a little, but what does that mean for us actually? What does it mean in terms of the trajectory? And for that, we're going to use one of Tiss's favourite models, Jaak Panksepp's emotional brain systems, really, which is, I think is a great way to reflect on our own needs, but also the needs of the children and the young people in our care. And then thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, what can I do about it? So using our practical application model of P and the 3 R's and Nadine Burke-Harris's 6 Steps for Good Mental Health. If you don't know Nadine Burke-Harris, She's the author of The Deepest Well, and she's done an awful lot of work on developing ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, which is the third of our models that we use in our training. So when we think about trauma, we might immediately think of emergencies, car accidents, house fires, divorce, illness, domestic abuse, bereavement. We don't tend to think of, well, teaching. We don't tend to think of an office job as being traumatic, perhaps, or being in a classroom amongst children, young people that bring us joy and delight. We don't tend to think of that as a potentially traumatic experience. But if we were to look at these two definitions here of trauma, let's start with the top one. Tara Brach works for the Australian Childhood Foundation, and her definition is trauma is a response to any event encountered as out of control, a frightening experience that disconnects us from all sense of resourcefulness, safety, coping or love. Talking with some delegates, some colleagues today, one was expressing a frustration and an anxiety that at any moment there could be a positive case in her class, which could mean that she's now self-isolating all over the Christmas period and not able to see her own family. That for me is a frightening experience. That, if I was in that situation, would leave me feeling out of control. It would probably disconnect me from my usual sense of resourcefulness because I know there's nothing that I can do. It certainly would leave me feeling unsafe, and maybe I would be struggling to cope in that circumstance. So COVID and everything that it's brought for us is the very definition of a traumatic experience. That's the truth. And the difference between whether or not we're traumatized by that experience or whether this is something that is just very stressful that we're going through really falls on the second definition here by Dr. Margot Sunderland. It's not the event itself, but an emotional response to an overwhelmingly painful and stressful event where there was no one there to help you with what was happening at the time. We talk a lot in trauma-informed schools about the potential of an emotionally available adult or an emotionally available other, because we are needing to be in connection, in relationship. We need it. Porges says it's a biological imperative. We need it like oxygen. It's relationship, relationship, relationship that will help us get through this troubled and traumatic time. And what we are going to talk about in the next hour really is kind of what sort of relationship and what on earth do we need to be doing within that. This bullet points here are very normal experiences as a result of something traumatic. Okay, I just invite you to reflect. Have you felt any fear, panic, anxiety, anger, irritability? Have you found yourself feeling a little bit argumentative, overwhelmed, maybe tearful for no apparent reason? Maybe actually in the face of all this, you feel an urgent need to be active. That's it. Let's get a plan, another risk assessment, something to do. Or maybe further down the list, incapacitation. Actually, I've tried everything. Nothing works. So I have no energy to do anything left. A narrowed window of tolerance, that bit that you can usually cope with actually is a little bit squashed. So suddenly you find yourself being less tolerant for the sort of things that you usually would be able to cope with. Maybe you've seen refusal, confrontation, tantrums, a need for control. Maybe you've suffered some disturbed sleep, a lack of sleep, sleeping too much, weird dreams. All of these are symptoms of our mind trying to process the traumatic event that is going on kind of in the background. What the brain can't bear to tolerate while we're awake, we push into our subconscious and then it comes back to kind of process during sleep. There's some awfully weird and entertaining dreams going on in the environment at the moment. Eating, overeating, undereating, eating all of the wrong things, not eating at all. A depression, certainly, when sadness, when we lose touch of kind of what it is that we feel sad about and it becomes an all-pervading gloom, then we are vulnerable to depression. And intrusive thoughts, ruminating thoughts, getting hooked on insignificant details and the wrong thoughts at the sort of wrong time. So if all of that's trauma, what do we mean by secondary trauma? Well, the definition of secondary trauma is literally witnessing another being traumatized, leading to the impact of the initial trauma being replicated on the second person. So ordinarily, we might think of helpers in the emergency services who are eyewitnesses to an event that they're supposed to mediate, people then that become overwhelmed by what they see and hear in person. So it's slightly different to vicarious trauma, which is often used interchangeably. So this is really being alongside a person whilst they are experiencing that trauma. And again, I come back to schools, staff, adults, children, parents, actually being alongside children who don't have that social buffer to stop them getting traumatized and experiencing it alongside. So the emergency services certainly are significantly at risk. But when we think about the emergency services, we don't tend to think about classrooms. We don't tend to think about schools. But the truth is, as Tamsin Ford, who leads on the NHS digital survey from Exeter University, says, schools are a frontline mental health service, like it or not. That's the truth now. That's what you're having to do. You're having to put yourselves literally at risk every day in order to keep doing your job, to keep doing the best for your children. It's kind of become a 7-day-a-week job, really. You're either there or you're on call or you're thinking about it. And the constant toll on your body of being alongside children who may be experiencing this in a very stressful way, being alongside staff and supporting staff is one of the indications of leading to secondary trauma. What are we talking about in terms of vicarious trauma? Well, think about vicarious in its definition, being exposed to another person's trauma history, or helping another with their trauma. Empathizing with others can cause us to literally feel their pain, and this deep connection to understand another person's traumatic experiences, if untreated, can result in depression, anxiety, despair, alienation, and inability to work or to experience any enjoyment. Vicarious trauma, as opposed to secondary trauma, generally doesn't happen in the moment, but it happens over prolonged exposure to the trauma of others. I kind of see this pandemic a bit like a chronic illness now. Initially, we felt perhaps a little bit rallied. We were in it together. We were coming together to support one another with care and saying we'll get through this. And the longer it goes on, the more spikes there are, and then it falls away, and then it increases. It becomes like that kind of chronic illness and leaves us, of course, vulnerable to vicarious trauma. So what does it look like? How do I know if I've got it, as it were? Well, your sense of yourself and your relationships becomes negatively transformed. It's that kind of cloud of gloom that falls over the top of things, leading me to feel hopeless, maybe a sense of despair. You may have similar physiological effects or symptoms as the traumatized person, such as poor sleep, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, all of those things that we talked about earlier, being easily startled. Maybe you start to feel physical symptoms like your heart racing, your stomach churning, your tension in your muscles, and have this impending sense of doom, this fear that things are going wrong and feeling generally more unsafe. Or to put it another way, this kind of overwhelming sense of anxiety that is just not riddable, really. You're seeing it in others, you're seeing it everywhere. You're hypersensitive or hyper alert to the next set of danger. So according to the Education Support Partnership, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, this is a survey that's done every year, and the 2020 statistics are absolutely fascinating and somewhat worrying. Stress levels of education and professionals across the UK this year, between July and October, rose from 62% to 84% of staff feeling stressed. That's a significant rise, bearing in mind that actually between July and October, we were well into the habit of knowing what we were doing. So as this goes on, it's not necessarily becoming more manageable or better, although we may have clear systems in place, but the continuation of those levels of anxiety and stress is actually taking its toll. 64% of teachers and 72% of senior leaders describe themselves as resilient, though, so we can cope. Surely that's what it means, really. We can rise above this and we can take charge, and we're okay. Thank you very much. 57% of education and professionals would not feel confident in disclosing unmanageable stress or mental health issues to their employer. And there's a big issue here. We absolutely need to destigmatise mental health. We all have physical health, and none of us is frightened of talking about poor physical health at some point. We all too have mental health, and we should be comfortable to say, actually, my mental health is not great at the moment, and I need to prioritise a little bit of self-care to look after myself. Only 8% of educational professionals have access to supervision as a safe space to discuss issues. We will talk more about what I mean by supervision, but I still find it staggering that we are the only caring profession that does not have regular access to somebody to support us, to listen to us, to hold us, to just offload onto without fear of repercussions or accountability. Educational professionals display much higher levels of depression than the general population. They also reported large increases in symptoms such as difficulty concentrating, insomnia, tearfulness. These symptoms become associated with clinically diagnosed mental health conditions, including depression over time. So we have to start taking this seriously, because the correlation between not having somebody to talk to, not having somebody to regulate, formally as well as informally, because there is a place for both, actually is going to lead to a build-up of these issues. And here we go, probably the most worrying statistic of all. Educators are 2 times more likely to take their own lives than the rest of the population. That's a worrying statistic, and is absolutely reflective of the level of stress. But 64% of teachers and 72% of senior leaders say, don't worry, I'm resilient, and maybe it's okay if actually I say it enough, and I put on my superhero cape, and I wear my fabulous mask, and I look as glamorous as this gorgeous little girl here, and I keep saying that to myself and to others. But we really need to look at what we mean by resilience. I often think about the word bounce back ability, that kind of rubberized feeling that, you know, I get knocked down, but I get up again, for want of breaking into song with Chumbawamba there. I'll try and avoid that tonight. It's kind of this keep calm and you keep a stiff upper lip. You put your big girl pants on, you put your lippy on, and you just get on with it. You just keep going. It's about hope, optimism after adversity. It's about good problem solving, good communication skills under stress, coping with stress in healthy ways, avoiding harmful coping strategies such as substance abuse. It's about finding positive meaning in your life despite all your difficult or traumatic events, and high levels of energy, a sense of optimism, curiosity, and the ability to detach and conceptualize problems. Surely, if I can do all of those things, then I'm resilient. Well, maybe, but there is an oversimplification here, and in our schools and in our colleges and in our communities, we are overusing the need for resilience. We're overusing the term and oversimplifying complex processes, because being resilient does not mean I can keep going and suppress all of those difficult and stressful feelings. It means that actually I can accept, understand, process, and be supported with the feelings that I'm having, and as a result of that support and that process, I can move on from that to find a more positive future. If we're talking about resilience as favouring coping above all else, rather than the importance of grieving or addressing painful feelings, then what we're doing is we are pushing those feelings down, and we are at greater risk of toxicity and later physical and mental difficulties. Coping can be a defence against feeling. The sort of scripts that you might hear or maybe resonate with what you do. Yeah, I'm fine, I'm a professional, I've been doing this for 20 years, of course I can cope. But the body keeps the score. When we say I'm okay, when we communicate with our words and our actions that it's okay, we can just keep going. Yes, I've had a cold for 6 weeks, but I can just keep going, I'll get through this. What happens is the body holds the score. The body takes on that toxicity and it tries to give you indications that you're not okay. And we might then dismiss that too. It's just a cold. It's just a 24-hour bug. I'll be okay. I just need to be quiet for a couple of days and then I'll pick myself up again. And what we need to do is we need to stop. We need to listen to our bodies. We need to pay attention to those indicators that all is not well before actually it affects not just our body, but our mind and our brain as well. Sometimes we might divert those thoughts and actually say, no, I'm not going to bear thinking about that at the moment. I'm just going to keep going. And that then sometimes comes out in sleeping problems or becoming a workaholic. If I work hard enough, then this issue will go away. We'll get through it. Maybe then we start to justify negative behaviours, well, I'm at work for such long hours, no wonder I get ratty with people, just ignore me, or please don't be nice to me, and those sorts of scripts creep in. And that, my friends, is absolutely not resilient, because some people who consider themselves resilient may cope really well with life and its knocks, because they're defending against painful feelings, but there is a cost in terms of life. Well, we squash negative feelings and we don't want to feel them. We also squash the positive feelings. So we don't feel the joy, we don't feel the passion, we don't feel the excitement in the same way. We start becoming a little bit numbed out, and that becomes our defense mechanism. We need these feelings vitally. We need the whole range of human emotions. Often we talk about there being positive emotions and negative emotions, and that's just rubbish. There is a whole range of human emotions for which are there for us to express all kinds of feelings. The way that we express anger certainly might be positive or negative, but it is okay to feel angry. It is okay to rage at the moment and say, this pandemic, it's just not fair. It's not okay. And no wonder you feel angry about it if you do. We need all of our feelings for quality of life, to feel passionate, to feel inspired, to feel anger appropriately in order to bring about positive change in the world, to follow your dreams, to find your no, and to inform you what you do want and don't want to do, what's hurting you, what's helping you. And supervision is one of those amazing things that in the company of a safe and trusted other, we can talk and express all of those feelings, knowing that actually this is part of the essential process. Because if we don't, if we repress those feelings, that's ultimately going to lead to mental health problems. Pain denied is pain transformed. That's a quote from Leslie Greenberg, who has done great studies on emotion-focused therapy. Pain denied is pain transformed. We can't think our way out of painful feelings. We can only process them and replace them with other emotions. And we can only do that in relationship and with the support of another. Otherwise, if we try to repress feelings, we may end up with physical symptoms, mental health issues, anxiety, aggression, a toxic impact on the body, mind and the brain. What exactly do we mean? Well, on the end of our chromosomes is this kind of white sticky matter known as our telomeres, and they are effectively the building blocks of life. Okay, they're involved in cell repair when we're young. They kind of come together to help heal us from childhood illnesses and difficulties like that. But as we age, they naturally shorten and fray, and that's fundamentally what causes the aging. It's very difficult to replicate telomeres as we get older, and of course resulting ultimately in death. Shortened telomeres are associated with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and major cancers. And what we know is unalleviated high levels of cortisol, the stress chemical as you may know it, toxic stress shortens our telomeres and is associated with long-term health difficulties and early mortality. Fundamentally, that absolutely can lead to an increased risk of type 2 diabetes, of heart attack and major cancers. So we do need to take this seriously. What I may be doing now is making you more anxious, of course, and there's certainly an increased level of anxiety in the world. More anxious children, more anxious adults, more anxious staff. We just don't know what's going to happen when it's going to happen, and we're constantly projecting forward to try and come up with a plan to deal with all of that anxiety. But the point is, when we get overloaded, our minds cannot hold it. So what we need to do is we need to find that emotionally available, safe container, somebody else to help you work through your experiences so that you don't have to deal with it alone. Connection is absolutely the alleviation of all this toxicity and all of this difficulty. Bottling up feelings or internalizing and ruminating can lead to a pressure cooker of feeling that doesn't necessarily think about time and place for its release. We should be asking a different question in our environments. Instead of saying, is this person resilient enough to cope with this? We should be saying, does our environment support resilience? Do we collectively have the policy, the structure, the capability, the resources, the support to be able to provide a resilient environment where actually all of these feelings are accepted and we can be there for one another, validating them? a couple of terms that may be more familiar than secondary trauma and vicarious trauma, but certainly are associated, are compassion fatigue and burnout. Definition there on the left for you in terms of compassion fatigue: anyone who suffers as a result of serving in a helping capacity, being involved in emotionally demanding situations over a long period, and ultimately may cause physical, emotional and mental exhaustion. Burnout, very similarly, and again often used interchangeably, anyone whose health, physical or mental, is suffering or whose outlook on life has turned negative because of the impact of the overload of their work. So the first one, really, the former, is more about working in a helping capacity, in a compassionate environment, in a caring job. And burnout is pretty much anybody who's fed up with their job. And of course, burnout can apply to anybody. It can apply to parents as well. Because that's probably one of the most important and toughest jobs that there is. Okay, the problem is these terms have become more acceptable and more, they can be sometimes worn as a badge of honour. You know, I'm suffering compassion fatigue, I'm a little bit fed up, but you know, we'll get through it. Burnout describes a state of emotional, physical and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. So just keeping going, just getting on with it, just not talking about my feelings, just denying that cold, all of those things can result in burnout. We end up feeling overwhelmed, emotionally drained, unable to meet the constant demands, depleted of energy, mental distance from one's jobs. You know that feeling on a Sunday evening where you just can't face thinking about work and winding yourself up from it. Ultimately, it reduces our productivity professionally and we lose compassion for others, and we start then getting into the blame game. That sort of, what's the matter with them? Why are they not here? It's their job. I come in despite a cold. Why can't they do it? And worse than that, of course, the loss of compassion for children. They're making my job harder. Why can't they just behave or just follow the rules? What's the matter with people? Compassion, however, is our biggest tool in supporting our young people and one another. Because burnout can lead us to lose access to our greatest resource unless we prioritise self-care. You'll have heard it in the aeroplanes. Put on your own oxygen mask before you put on the oxygen mask of another. It is so vital, and self-care is often viewed in our profession as selfish, and it's fundamentally not selfish. In order to keep doing this job for the long term, you have to prioritise your own self-care. You have to think about what it is that you need. If you have any of these, then you are at significant risk of compassion fatigue, burnout and vicarious trauma. If you have experiences of your own personal trauma that are unrelieved and unsupported, then they are likely to be re-triggered in the face of this ongoing trauma. Maybe you have unrealistic expectations of yourself. Maybe you feel irritable or unwilling to attend to self-care. Maybe you have an inability to recognise that you're being affected by the overload of work. Maybe you have too high demands from others and the situation. Maybe you're suffering from a lack of resources and time, as many of us are, and you feel a complete lack of control. So hold on to that list, certainly, and just notice, how is this for me? Where am I at the moment? This is a cartoon that was splashed all over social media recently, certainly on a teacher forum. These are some of the physical symptoms when stress manifests in the body, and signs that we absolutely need to stop now, take a breather and start to take care of ourselves. Am I feeling overwhelmed or cynical? Am I frustrated and unfulfilled? Have I got a sense of apathy or over complaining, one end or the other? Do I feel depleted and exhausted after work? Am I suffering from headaches and muscle tension? Am I leaning more and more on the ways of regulating through alcohol after work, or needing to sleep ridiculous amounts of time? Here's a little clip from Alan de Botton, who runs the schooloflife.com. He's got some great insights and does it in a very humorous way. And what he talks about really is, you know what, we are trying to wear too many hats at the moment. We are trying to do too many things and expecting perfection from all of them. Whereas, yeah, trying to be an Audi sports car.
This is the Audi R8. It's a highly efficient and compelling car. Its engine produces an astonishing 199 kW at 6,500 RPM and a torque of 330 Nm at 4,000 RPM. Now, part of the reason that it's so efficient, and part of what makes us human beings comparatively inefficient, is that this car has only one goal, And that goal is exceptionally clear. It has to go very fast down tarmac roads. As a general principle, no machine can be optimally efficient at more than one thing. A robot that has to both climb stairs and make pancakes will be far less efficient than two distinct machines, each of which can focus exclusively on a single task. The more limited the goals, the higher one's chances of efficiency. Now, unlike the Audi sports car, our brains are not designed or evolved to be maximally efficient at any one thing. This amazing cognitive and emotional machine is a profound generalist. It comes moderately well equipped for a huge range of possible activities. To write a novel, spear fish, bring up a child, drive very fast up Fifth Avenue, sit in a high-rise office writing reports, live in a hut in New Guinea, marry, plot an assassination, live in an ice cave, go into politics, stay single, or expand a small business into the Asia market. Now, the price we pay for being generalists is that we'll be less good at any one of the many activities we perform than someone who did only one thing their whole life long. We might not be the very best at inflating party balloons. The house will be a bit dirty. We might be a bit late for the meeting. We'll not be perfect, patient and interested dinner companions. We'll mess up the public presentation again. Someone would probably be better than we are at helping a child to paint. This might be quite depressing at moments, perhaps late at night as we look back across the day. But before we get too sad, we should realize that our less than completely optimal performance is down to one very understandable thing, that we've chosen breadth and variety over total focus and narrow perfection. And that's a very wise choice. Focusing on one thing to the exclusion of all others has its costs, as anyone who's ever spoken to an athlete who trains 10 hours a day tends to find out. There's a cost to being the human equivalent of a sports car. Unfortunately, our society has set up an absurd idea that it will be possible to do many things and do them all completely well. That's why we hear so much talk about an elusive thing called work-life balance, a perfectly optimal career and a perfectly optimal home life. This is a mad idea. Work-life balance is impossible because everything worth fighting for unbalances your life. We're not going to be at once the ideal domestic chef, childcarer and CEO. If we're strung out across multiple roles, all will suffer, but that's okay. That you're doing too much and none of it without mistakes isn't a sign that your life has gone wrong. It's a sign of a very wise and understandable position, that you've opted for imperfect variety over flawless focus.
Imperfect variety over flawless focus.
This is...
Oh, I love it. Absolutely love it. So I guess my encouragement from this is, so what is the one thing that you absolutely want to focus on, really? And how can you look after yourself in order to do that? What's going on in terms of stress? Well, there are three kinds of stress that we experience. There's positive stress, brief elevations in heart rate, mild elevations in stress hormone levels. So your heart beats a bit faster, the cortisol rises, mobilizing you and giving you a sharper focus in your frontal lobes for a short period of time. Maybe there's a presenter feeling a little bit of positive stress right now, not being able to see people on Teams. How frustrating is that? It's temporary and it's really good for us because once we have been there and survived that experience, then actually we know that we can go there again. We can do it next time, and next time it'll be a little bit easier. Every now and then we tip into tolerable stress, and tolerable stress is serious and maybe ongoing. Maybe you've lost a job or the death of a loved one or a serious illness, a loss of a relationship. All of these only remain tolerable if there's somebody else there to support us and to help us to make sense of that, to be able to talk about it, to see to our needs, to regulate us. It's buffered by supportive relationships. That is the thing that stops us and buffers us from dropping into toxic stress. And toxic stress literally does what it says on the tin. It is toxic, it's poisonous, and it's the prolonged activation of our stress response system, the absence of protective relationships that over time will affect the body, mind and brain. Yes, we need informal relationships to keep us buoyant, but actually when you're dealing with a significant amount of toxic stress, we also need formal opportunities and avenues to be able to talk about these experiences and feelings in order to find some alleviation from it. 67% of educational professionals expressed having experienced mental health issues in the last year. Things including Anxiety, depression, panic attacks, acute stress, exhaustion. Okay, 74% of educational professionals reported they'd experienced physical, behavioural or psychological symptoms attributed to work-related stress. It's not enough just to go out for a drink on a Friday night, to talk to your colleagues about work, to offload onto your partner. What happens is as that toxicity increases in the body, minor stresses become experienced as major emergencies. You have total meltdowns over the smallest of things, caused by your amygdala, that tiny part in the middle of your brain that's looking out for the next threat that will take you out. It's reacting, it's keeping reacting, and then it begins overreacting. It becomes trigger happy, so your stress response system stays alert all of the time, which means the flooding of stress chemicals throughout your body, cortisol, glutamate, CRF, constantly in control of your body, leaving you feeling physically exhausted and emotionally very, very vulnerable. I popped this one in because I thought it was a little bit festive. Resilience really is not about not sweating the small stuff, but about coping with the small stuff because of your ability to activate your care, your play systems, your seeking systems, to be in connection with others. It can tell a lot about a man or a woman by the way she or he handles these three things: a rainy holiday, lost luggage, and tangled Christmas tree lights. If those sorts of things leave you to feeling heart palpitations and you're experiencing them minor emergencies as major emergencies, minor stresses as major emergencies, then certainly there's some toxicity in your body and your mind. What we know is toxic stress changes brain architecture. Here's a normal picture of a brain with typical neurons with many, many, many connections. And under toxic stress, what we know is we get damaged neurons, fewer connections, and they start to erode. We start to lose count of things. We can't remember things. We can't function. We can't think clearly. Our cognition is affected. Enriched relational experiences, however, bring about neurogenesis and synaptogenesis in parts of the brain where trauma has caused cell death. Being in relationship absolutely is not pink and fluffy and just about making you feel better in the moment. It changes your brain wiring. It gives you opportunity to regrow neuronal pathways, to absolutely enhance your cognition so that you are better able to both regulate yourself and to do your job better. Jaak Panksepp, Professor Jaak Panksepp, amazing guy, affective neuroscientist for 40 years, studied human emotions in the brain by wiring up the brains of various mammals and understanding their emotional responses. We've learned so much about neurochemistry from Panksepp, and he's still a little bit too unknown in my mind. If you Google him, he often comes up as the rat tickler because he discovered that tickling rats makes them giggle, and many other things. He wrote a great paper on the separation distress circuit of carpfish. It's like, you know, most of the world absolutely wouldn't care about that, but he was absolutely passionate about understanding these human emotions. And what he found before his death a couple of years ago was that we have 7 genetically ingrained systems in our brain. 3 of which we refer to as our alarm systems: rage system, fear system, and panic grief system, which is the system that activates when we experience loss. And then 3 pro-social systems that move us towards relationship: care or the attachment system, seeking system, and play system. There's also a 7th system which comes online in late adolescence, which is lust, and lust is purely about sex, so you don't need to worry about that at the moment. But Panksepp says mental health is a balance of these 2 sets of systems, and mental ill health is an imbalance of these systems. And however much we experience one or the other, they become part of our personality for better or worse. So if actually I'm angry, I'm frightened, or I experience catastrophic loss, then those systems become dominant in my brain. If my environment is experiencing fear, rage, and a sense of loss, as most environments are at the moment, then those become dominant in our school cultures, in our staff rooms, in our classrooms, amongst our children, amongst our communities. But the good news is actually we can affect this by addressing the pro-social systems and applying a sense of care, first to oneself, self-care, then to one another. Then we can tickle the seeking system and the play system and change the neurochemical balance. They cannot work optimally at the same time. Either my stress chemicals are dominant or my pro-social chemicals are dominant. When my pro-social chemicals are dominant, I feel amazing. I feel Teflon coated. I feel like I can do anything. But when my stress chemicals are dominant and rage, fear, panic, grief are activated in my brain, that derails my capacity to think in an instant. My frontal lobes go offline. I can't think, I can't care, I can't play, I'm not interested, and the primitive impulses of fight, flight and freeze become dominant. And that means, in effect, my perception of the world is coloured sort of grey. I kind of dread everything. I fear the worst everywhere. I'm constantly anxious and I don't imagine that anybody else can help me. And that will lead to mental illness. Any culture, any person, any family, group, school, community where the brain's fear system and rage system and panic grief system are dominant will block the care, seeking and play. They always win out. Threat is where our brain is wired. We are threat focused. And until we look at the threat and say, actually, I'm frightened of this, or actually, I'm angry about this, then we cannot activate the pro-social systems. And then we fall into blame, don't we? So we take one of these four positions, and it will be interesting to see, just reflect for yourself where you are. The defense of invulnerability means that I will take up a life position and I will adopt one of these four positions, starting from the least healthy, going to the most healthy. The mentally healthy position that I can do when I feel resilient and upbeat and connected and in relationship and supported and cared for. Yes, there's a problem. It's to do with me and I can do something about it. I have some potency. I have a sense of agency. If I'm not feeling mentally well, I might move into, well, there is a problem. It might be to do with me, but I can't do anything about it, can I? I'm completely useless in this. I'm powerless. That then is liable to move to, there is a problem, but it's not to do with me. It's her fault. It's his fault. It's their fault. It's the government's fault. It's somebody else's fault. Through to the worst case scenario, which is the denial of problems. There isn't a problem. There's no problem. What's the problem? As we become more psychologically aware and less defended, we can move up the mental health positions. But sometimes it's a bit like being in a deep, dark hole. We can't do it alone. We need somebody else to be alongside, to listen to us, to support us, to move from there isn't a problem to that sense of awareness of feeling. When we get an awareness of feeling, we need the expression of feeling to be able to say in the safety of a relationship, it's just not fair. I don't feel that it's okay, so that we can ultimately move to that sense of, yeah, okay, there may be an element at which I'm responsible. Otherwise, we keep going on the blame game and then we start taking it out on other people. I don't know if you can see that clearly. It says it's a new antidepressant. Instead of swallowing it, you just throw it at anyone who appears to be having a good time. Depression is a killer, you know, let's not underestimate the impact of it. And people who suffer from it certainly suffering in winter with the dark nights, but also suffer watching other people be happy. So, you know, there's so many people that are so vulnerable to depression at the moment. I love this slide. This is an fMRI scan from Damasio, The Secret Life of the Brain. Red looks at increased activation and purple looks at decreased activation, the brain going offline. And if we look at anger here, we've got the brainstem here. It's a very, very primal response. The frontal lobes gone offline, purple, decreased activation. When I'm angry, I can't think, I can't reflect, I can't do anything because I'm angry. I'm just trying to survive. If I'm frightened, fear, very similarly, deep in the brainstem, very little happening up here, and certainly my frontal lobes massively going offline. I can't think, I can't reflect, I can't plan, I can't have empathy, I can't order, I can't sequence, I can't do any of those things because I'm frightened. Sadness, loss, a total overwhelm in the brain. So deep into the brainstem, affecting even my senses, my feelings. I might be filled with numbing opioids that stop me from feeling anything, and absolutely leaking into my sense of self-perception, my sense of self-worth. We are really, really vulnerable to sadness at the moment because everybody has lost so much, their sense of normality, routine, connection with people that they love, the ability to touch, the ability to go where they like, and even the ability to feel in control of things. But look at this one here. Happiness. Very little happening in the brainstem, very little new happening in the brainstem, massive activation across the cortex and especially in the frontal lobes. If we're happy, if we're safe, if we feel supported, and connected in relationship, then fundamentally we can do anything. We can start putting on our superhero capes. So how do we stop it? In the face of a global pandemic, how do we stop activating the fear system and instead activate the care, seeking and play systems? Because when these systems are working together, the whole world feels possible. When these chemicals are dominant in our brains, then we get this sense of all is well in my world. The neurochemicals of opioids and oxytocin, when they are massively activated, we don't want to fight, we don't feel anxious because they can't coexist with those other stress chemicals. They work in a beautifully coordinated way that triggers compassion, generosity, spontaneous expressions of affection and warmth. They're all anti-anxiety chemicals. So we need to focus on care for one another and absolutely care for ourselves, because if we don't prioritise care for ourselves, we also run the risk of overactive care systems. So I care so much about you, I care so much about the children, I care so much about the job that I'm doing that I forget about me. Two symptoms of overactive care systems, I think, is if you get through a school day and you haven't seen weather, then that's probably an overactive care system. If you get through the whole school day and you didn't stop for a wee, then that's probably an overactive care system. Take stock, remember weather, remember to stop and to look after your own physiological needs. How many cups of tea have you had made for you that just go cold? Those are the symptoms of just busyness taking over from self-care. What do we do? Well, we simply, Panksepp says, we need to balance the systems. We need to modify the rage, fear and panic grief systems. And sometimes we can do that just by acknowledging them, just by saying, oh my goodness, you are absolutely furious with this situation. I really hear that you're furious, and I get. No wonder you're furious, because you haven't been allowed to do what you really wanted to do. Rather than saying, don't be angry, or calm down, or don't have that feeling, don't be sad, we need to acknowledge it and say, I get that you're frightened. I'm so sorry. Help me understand how I can support you with this. Because by acknowledging the fear, we turn it off and then we activate the care system. And in relationship, all things become possible. So how do we sort this? So our practical strategy that we use in TIS is the P and the 3 R's. That's protect, relate, regulate and reflect. And, you know, there's a few things under there that address all of these different areas. The reflect, of course, is the important bit, because reflect will take toxic stress to tolerable stress. But we can't reflect unless we feel safe, unless we have relationships, and unless we can regulate ourselves. You'll notice then in each column is supervision, 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 supervision. The opportunity to connect with somebody that you feel safe with, that you can build a relationship with, that will support you to regulate, is the fundamental role of supervision, to help you to reflect on where you are in terms of your journey and where you are in terms of your feeling and whether or not you're taking good care of yourself. So I mentioned at the start the fabulous Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. Any of you that have done some training around ACEs probably will have heard of her. She's absolutely taken the original study by Felitti and Anders in 1998 and developed the work. I can highly recommend this book if you don't like reading. She also reads it herself on Audible. It's a beautiful, beautiful story about ACEs, about her work, and certainly about her own family and life too. And what she says, you know, is that there is a program that she implements. She's a pediatrician primarily. She's now the Californian Surgeon General, but she implements a self-care treatment plan of these 6 things. She does this for herself. She does this for her staff. She does this for the clients that come to her. A specialist in ADHD. She had 100 children referred to her with symptoms of ADHD. And by applying this treatment plan and not medication over a period of time, 97 of them, the symptoms went away. 3 of them actually did have ADHD, and those children had very different family backgrounds. So what she says we need to do is we need to have strong, positive relationships. We need to stay connected with family, friends, colleagues, and in more formal settings. A sense of mindfulness, diet, sleep, exercise, and of course we need to address directly talking about our own mental health. So for the rest of the time that I've got left, which isn't much, I'm going to run briefly through these. What is it that we need to do to take care of ourselves? Build strong, positive relationships, physically distanced maybe, but emotionally connected. Let's find creative ways that we can connect with the people that we miss. Let's find opportunities to check in, send people postcards, send people notes, send people post-its. Do whatever you're allowed to do and find ways of letting people know that they matter to you. Mattering is one of the most important things in our brain. Can I still be thought about even when I'm not with you? Feeling held in mind, that's the expression by Winnicott. Feeling like I matter to another person is a route to amazing prosocial chemicals in my brain. Providing safe spaces to talk, to be heard, not judged, to be received compassionately. And this is not only the role of senior leaders, of course, this is the role of all of us as human beings, as compassionate others. Play, humour, fun, an important element in that. And 7 minutes of empathic listening grows a new neuronal pathway in the brain. So take 7 minutes to listen empathically to someone else. Take 7 minutes to be listened to empathically. Ask somebody to just talk to you and just to reflect back and to support you for 7 minutes, and know that that's having an amazing impact in your brain. Connection, as Porges says, is a biological imperative. It's not something that we just enjoy. It's something that we need like oxygen, fundamentally. This is a lovely story here. This is Owen and this is Mazee. Owen was an orphaned hippo in the tsunami some years ago. And because he knew the loveliness of connection, he sought out relationship with this 103-year-old tortoise who gets very little from it. But Owen is seeking the oxytocin uplift of relationship. We need it. We're made in relationship. We're born in relationship. We go out of this world in relationship. Relationship is what helps our brain grow and thrive. Just listening with acceptance and not judgment calms our body, mind and brain. This study that was conducted following the original Felitti and Anders study asked 130,000 people were offered somebody to talk to about their painful childhood experiences for just an hour a week, not trained therapists or counsellors, just somebody to listen empathically. And over the following year, 35% reduction in GP visits and an 11% reduction in A&E visits. So we know that this works. We have the brain science to show that empathic listening leads to good vagal tone. Vagal tone is our foot brake in signs of stress, our ability to calm ourselves down, to learn to use life well, to concentrate. All of these things are not just luxuries to us, they are fundamental to our capacity to regulate. Stephen Porges says that we need to be relating through social engagement. When we feel safe, when we feel okay, we have a well-balanced autonomic nervous system. The optimal activation of these amazing neurochemicals in our brain, opioids and oxytocin amongst them. When we feel connected, we feel that everything is possible. But when we feel threatened or disconnected, actually we have a surge of stress chemicals that block those prosocial chemicals, and we have an overactive autonomic nervous system. It squashes our window of tolerance, so we are more likely to overreact and move into a sense of fight, flight, or into a sense of freeze. It affects our capacity to regulate ourselves significantly. This study here shows that loneliness is as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's catastrophic. It absolutely is toxic on the body, but quality of life is found in cultures which support the care system. Again, neurochemically, brain, oxytocin, opioids and prolactic systems are the key participants in these subtle feelings that we call acceptance, nurturance and warmth. And I'm sure as you look at that picture, as I do, what you can see is the loveliness, the warmth, the connection, the relationship and the flooding of those great chemicals. Thinking about our schools, what can we do in terms of our schools? Well, we need to look after one another, look out for one another, ensuring that everybody in our school community feels valued and respected and experiences frequent praise. We're very good at doing that for the children, but we're not great at hearing it, so we kind of shy away from doing it for adults too. We need to have spaces where we can step away from challenging situations without fear of criticism. We need opportunities for breaks in a soothing environment. And I know that this is resource heavy. I know that this requires time. I know that this requires planning. But if we don't do it, actually, what are we doing to our greatest and most expensive resource, our teachers? And we need regular supervision and support to be able to share feelings in order to promote positive mental health. Safe, structured, reflective groups. You can do this amongst yourself. Just come together, have an agenda item of actually we're just going to talk about how it is today. Let's process it together. Let's reflect back together. Let's listen empathically to one another. Let's celebrate things and let's do fun things together. And I'm sure you've got a million other ideas, but those strong positive relationships are the key to being able to regulate and to look after one another. Number 2 on Nadine's list is mindfulness, and certainly a sense of mindsight. Mindsight is being aware of how your mind works and how it reacts in different ways. Being able to be steady and still. Doing something just for you, no demands for others. What is it that you can do for you today? What is it that you know works for you when you feel stressed? What is it that keeps your cup topped up? Because you can't pour from an empty cup. If you're exhausted, then that will absolutely spill it out of you. Nor can you pour into a cup that's already overflowing. So if actually you're trying to do 6 jobs, which ones can you offer up and ask for support with? Access to oxytocin releasing environments. Oxytocin, one of our amazing neurochemicals, is released through relationship, through eye contact, through touch. And aren't we missing that for some of us? So we can find it in lots of other ways too. Nature, green, blue spaces, emits negative ions, builds our serotonin levels, offers increased oxytocin levels, particularly if we do these things in relationship. Warm lights, colour, sensory richness, music, comfort in fabric, although if you cuddle a teddy bear you have to leave it in a room on its own for 72 hours. External warmth, heating the body, things like electric blankets, look after yourself when the weather changes, nurture yourself, know that you are doing your brain some good as well as your body some good. Mindfulness, being steady, being present. Yoga, 10-minute foot, hand or head massage, nature and animals. All of these release oxytocin and are incredibly good for us. Number 3. Number 3 is diet, and good quality food cannot be underestimated. 80% of our serotonin is produced in our gut. Okay, we have this natural medicine cabinet inside our bodies and our brains, and we just need to know that for access to it. Oxytocin, feeling like, oh, that was a lovely meal, I really enjoyed that, is a huge stress regulator and a producer of oxytocin. Fruit and veg, high in antioxidants, we know this, but they also play a powerful role in protecting the body from toxins and are the basis for dopamine. So increased dopamine through diet. Tyrosine, found in protein, is a precursor of dopamine. So it may look a bit green and a little bit healthy when actually what you crave is the carbs and the sugar and the high fat diet. And that is your cortisol saying my sugar levels are all over the place and they're crashing all over the place. But what we actually need is important, well-balanced meals. Don't skip meals, no matter how busy you are. It's hugely, hugely important, not only to your body, but to your neurochemistry. Number 4, exercise or just getting outside. Exercise releases endorphins, another amazing feel-good factor in the brain. We utilize excess energy from the stimulation of the stress response. So as the adrenaline rises, we need to burn it off. So we can replace those stress chemicals through exercise with endorphins, opioid and serotonin. Group games are a great way to do this because anything done in a group massively boosts the chemical uplift of all of these. They stimulate the vagus nerve and help us to reset our stress response. And of course, being outdoors, we are wired to be outdoors, and the impact of that is utterly, utterly amazing. It's a whole nother training, of course, but a passion and a love of mine is understanding why we are wired mentally healthy wise to be in the outdoors. Edward Wilson coined the phrase the biophilia hypothesis, and he said we've got this innate connection with animals and other species. We've got a need to observe the natural world and the animals in it, and without it we can't be mentally well. If you breathe inside and then just take a breath of fresh air outside, you'll know that you breathe much deeper, and that means we get much more of the chemical uplift as a result of doing that. Kaplan and Kaplan in 1989 came up with attention restoration theory. This is utterly fascinating. After spending 20 minutes a day in nature, we can concentrate better. 20 minutes a day in nature boosts our serotonin levels. It boosts our natural killer cells. It makes us feel healthier and more physically well, but also mentally more clear. In nature, there are things that move but effectively stay the same, and we can look at those with effortless attention. Have you ever found yourself staring into a fire, or staring at a fish tank, or watching the clouds move, or watching the wind blow across the grass? All of those things, our brains are completely wired to find them soothing and calming. So we get addicted, which is a rush of dopamine to the brain, but we also get a boost of melatonin, so it calms and soothes the body, and importantly helps us sleep. 20 minutes a day in nature, or 2 hours a week if you can't do it every day, even when you don't enjoy it, has a beneficial impact on your mental health. So get out there. Green spaces particularly emit negative ions, improving your serotonin. Blue spaces even more so. So if you're lucky enough to live near a coast, then definitely go and find a coast, because the opposite of soft fascination, that addictive quality of feeling rested and restored, is hard fascination. And that's of course something we get through technology. And the addiction that we have with technology is also dopamine related. We can't stop looking. We just want to check our emails one more time. We just want to see the bright light flashing at the screen, stimulating our brain and filling us with dopamine. But in hard fascination and in technology, actually, we get a suppression of melatonin. So what happens is we are actually just addicted to the light, and ultimately it suppresses our melatonin and it stops us from sleeping. We absolutely love technology. I'm not anti-technology. Technology gives us the ability to be in control and to be connected. How many of you, while you're watching this, are also texting someone else, or for utilising Twitter? And all of those things, because it's about connection, actually can raise our oxytocin by up to 13%. It makes us feel amazing. We can now be together and we can be everywhere else, so we don't have any fear of missing out anymore. We stress regulate because of the dopamine hits in the brain. But the problem is, over time, actually, the addiction to tech, being able to control everything, is actually making us more anxious. The chemical dopamine addiction of instant means that we can't look at anything other than technology. The chemical addiction of likes is giving us a false sense of who we are and how we're appreciated. The absence of physical connections and only utilising technology means that we're not having the same level of oxytocin uplift as if we were in the same room as somebody. We can't seem to regulate without it, and there's a whole generation of young people now that haven't learned to regulate without technology. So if you take it off them, actually they fall apart. That's before we even get into issues of cyberbullying and how we are using the internet to troll people and make them feel bad. The problem is not actually the tech, but it's the addiction of tech. We just need to turn off the phone every now and then, get outside, maximise the use of outdoors and nature in order to regulate your neurochemistry and to support you to feel better. I'm nearly there, number 5 of 6. So 5 is sleep. It's absolutely vital. I don't need to tell you this, you know this. Even looking at somebody sleeping, in fact, even looking at a small dog sleeping actually will regulate your stress levels. But of course, we need to do it for ourselves. We need 7 to 8 hours for recovery, and having a good hygiene routine is really important. So what we know is that technology wakes up the brain and we are less able to come down from that and sleep restfully and healthily. The final bit I want to talk about, however, is self-regulation and mental health. So we now need to take action to support our own mental health. We need collectively, as educators, I believe, to start championing for the importance of supervision. It's not acceptable that only 8% of educators get a level of self-supervision to support their mental health. The Welsh Government thankfully has got this amazing wellbeing offer, of which this is a part. I know there are other things on offer. Find out about the wellbeing offer and what you can do to support your own mental health and that of one another's. Recognise that self-care is not selfish. This enables you to be able to give your best to others. Put on your own oxygen mask before you look to put on the oxygen mask of others. Find practitioners that understand this, that you can talk to, people who can facilitate groups of people to be able to talk about what it's like for you at the moment, the stresses of the job, so that you can leave them in those spaces and not take them home. These groups need to be boundary, time limited, and listening not to fix but to understand. We have this misunderstanding as educators that we need to fix everything, and that's not true. We just need to be heard fundamentally. One-to-one group supervision. If you can't do supervision with a clinician, think about therapeutic reflective spaces, just an emotionally available other, somebody who is trained to listen well, to support you with that awareness of feeling, the expression of feeling, and your ability to reflect on feelings. This is Leslie Greenberg, who I referred to earlier, and not Santa in disguise. So supervision is effectively, just break that down, supervision, being able to stand outside the emotional intensity of the problem and to be able to see clearly somewhere else, because the healing power of talking about feelings and making sense of them dissipates the stress response system. So we would recommend weekly, fortnightly, monthly, or at least half-termly supervision, therapy, counselling, or reflective practice. It doesn't matter what you choose really, but find somebody effectively that it is their job to listen to you. It's all very well offloading onto your partner, and maybe they are tremendously steady and able to listen to you and to support you about what's going on at school. But the chances are most people don't listen too well. And even if they do, actually, you then have to listen to them offload about their day as well. And that's fundamentally not what we need when we are as a frontline mental health service and dealing with the difficulties that you're currently dealing with. Research shows that after counselling or psychotherapy, we've got optimal activation of calming and pro-social chemicals in the brain. All of these chemicals are dominant in our brain if we can take the time to look after it. Brain scans taken before and after therapy show that after therapy we've got a decreased activation in the amygdala, that alarm centre, increased activation in the prefrontal cortex, the bit that supports me to think clearly, improved cognitive processing, cognitive flexibility, a sense of safety of being in the world that comes from the intuitive knowledge that you can regulate the flows and the shifts of our body, based emotional states either by one's own coping capacities or within a relationship with caring others. I'm hurrying now, and you can probably hear me speeding up because there's so much that I want to say and I don't have time left. But that's what we need to do. We need support from an emotionally available other to reflect back how it is in terms of our behaviour, in terms of our feelings, in terms of our thoughts, so that we can express it appropriately in the right way and not have it kick off like a pressure cooker. Last slide, almost, John, honestly, just give me 2 more seconds. I love this quote here. John Bailing is a neuroscientist. He says, you had that awful experience, but you couldn't reflect on it or grow from it because no one helped you go back over it, make sense of it, reflect on it, and make new meaning. If I can help you change that story, you can start to re-edit it and think about yourself and find compassion for the hurt kid inside you. We owe it to our teachers, we owe it to ourselves to provide ourselves with activities and pursuits that release those amazing chemicals stored in our own medicine cabinet. I will stop there.
I know that everyone's really applauding now, Coral. I can hear it all virtually. But the good news is we've got some questions that have come through. If you're happy to just go straight into them. Thank you so much for that. I know that Kath will finish up at the end, but that was amazing. And I took loads away from that. Thank you. So are you okay to go straight into the questions? Yes, absolutely. Okay, so there is a lot of media reports regarding long-term impact if you've been diagnosed with COVID. Is it the same with recovering from secondary trauma? And is it going to take a while for our educational workforce to recover?
Well, I can only give you my personal opinion. I'm not a clinician, as I said. I think that we have to hold on to hope because everything is possible. What we do know about the brain is we have 100% neuroplasticity, so it's never too late. But often people say to me, well, how long does it take a 6-year-old to heal from trauma? And how long does it take a 12-year-old? And the answer really is how long is a piece of string? It depends on our exposure to the trauma. It depends on the levels of support that we've had. And it depends on how long we've been living with the impact of that trauma. So, yes, I think it will take time for us to recover. But it is something that is imminently possible if we hold hands together really and actually start acknowledging and talking about this. You know, there's the intergenerational impact of trauma as well. If you look into epigenetics, what you can find is actually that trauma is also passed through the genes, and we can feel the impact of trauma of generations ago. But it is reversible, it is stoppable, we can change it.
Fantastic. Next question is, are there any vegetables, fruit in particular, that have a greater healing impact?
Oh, again, I'm not a chef, I don't know, but I do know that, what's his name, the really tall guy from Taunton, is it Tom Kerridge? Tom Kerridge has got an amazing cookery book, which is called the Dopamine Cookery Book or something along those lines. So definitely Google that, because he absolutely lists the foods that are rich in dopamine, and definitely support it. All fruit and vegetables, the greener or the redder, the healthier they are, I understand, but in terms of antioxidants. But yeah, that's all I know, I'm afraid, on that one.
Okay, so how can we support a colleague who is operating with a full glass and not recognizing? So I'm assuming with a, you know, not a full glass and not recognizing it then.
Yeah, full glass or an empty glass, I think it's about taking time. So the model of the protect, relate, regulate, reflect has to be followed in that order. So I will not reflect on my behavior, my feelings or my actions until I feel safe in a relationship. When I feel safe in a relationship, I need to be able to regulate as well. And if actually that conversation is going to overwhelm me, then I'm probably not going to reflect on it too. So really it's about building the care system, meeting the needs of one another, not expecting the behaviour to suddenly stop, but to say, you know, what I'm noticing about you is you're still here 10 hours a day. Help me understand how I can support you with this. Taking time to look after ourselves will enable us to look outwards and to notice the difficulties and the challenges for one another. Those subtleties are there, and we do know them in relationship. I don't know if that answers the question, but
definitely. We've got two more then. So should the COVID-19 pandemic form part of the new curriculum in order to help learners open up about their experiences?
I don't know about COVID-19 forming part of the new curriculum, but you know, I'm really excited about the new Welsh curriculum, and I think that what COVID-19 has done is given us an amazing opportunity to try it out and to embrace the possibility of prioritising care, compassion, well-being, kindness and play, importantly, alongside things like outdoor learning. And all of those things absolutely will support our neurochemicals to flourish, and so we can overcome these difficulties together. I think we have to talk about it rather than not talk about it. Because anything that we stop talking about certainly will increase that level of unsureness and uncertainty. There's a great quote by Fred Rogers, and he says, anything that is human is mentionable, and anything mentionable becomes more manageable. Yeah.
I like that. Okay, last one from me. What would be your top tip for a teacher to get through these last 2 weeks, which probably would be, you know, hard enough in a normal year, but significantly under more pressure this year?
I think it's not about thinking when I get to Christmas. I think it's about thinking, what can I do to look after myself in the next hour or even 10 minutes, or having a goal on one particular day. Today, I'm going to get outdoors for 20 minutes, or today I'm going to go home at 3:30. Finding that tiny step that will get you through the next moment in time, and be kind to yourself when you get it wrong and you don't have a great day.
Fantastic. Thank you, Coral. I think that's all the questions. I can't see any more. Hang on, let me just have a look. No, just a comment. Thank you, Coral. I really needed this to remind me about looking after my own cup, which is a nice thing. I'm going to hand over to Kath now, I think, who's going to just finish up. Thank you very much, Coral.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Coral, what just an excellent session to listen to, and it was just so appropriately timed. You know, we know and we recognise that the workforce is exhausted, and I think you've given the boost that they need. So on behalf of everyone, can I thank you very much for today's webinar. Your session has made us stop to think and to reflect on our own well-being. You've offered excellent advice on what we can do to start to recover, rebuild and bounce back as you referred to in one of your slides, and of course to focus on our self-care. Now I know you love a quote, Coral, so I've got a quote for you, because the Queen, when she spoke directly about the coronavirus, she said we should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return, we will be with our friends again, we will be with our families again, and we will meet again. And tonight you have definitely given us sound advice and strategies to help us to come through this, to rebuild and to reboot. And so I do sincerely thank you for your time, Coral. Absolutely super messages you've delivered to us tonight. So thank you and diolch.
Thank you very much, Cass. Diolch yn fawr iawn.